We're joined by Phil Steele today of PhilSteele.com and the college football preview, and it's the All-Star break, and traditionally we have Phil on the show to give us his college football preview. We resume now by taking a look at conferences, and the Big 12 is up next. Two new additions with TCU and West Virginia coming out of the Big East. A lot of traveling for West Virginia's Mountaineers.
Oh, absolutely. And, as we touched on earlier, all their programs going to have the increased travel costs. But I think both teams are going to have a little bit of a culture shock this year. Not so much that they're going to be bad teams, but I don't think they're going to have the double-digit win success that they've had in recent years. You look at who TCU was beating last year. They were beating Mountain West opponents. They play a lot of the Idahos, the UL Monroes of the world. And with West Virginia, last year, if you look at their last three games, they went and played Cincinnati. Cincinnati had a backup quarterback. They barely escaped. They overcame a second-half deficit, won by 3. Then in the next week, they played Pitt. Pitt was without their top 4 running backs. Once again, overcame a second-half deficit, won by 3. And then the season final against South Florida, they overcame a late deficit and won by 3. They're a team that won the Big East on a tiebreaker last year prior to beating Clemson, putting up those 70 points. I think they'll have an explosive offense this year, but I don't quite know if we'll have the success that they had in the Big East or TCU has the success of the Mountain West. But it's going to be a lot of fun to watch how these teams plug into the Big 12.
Now, in the Big 12, obviously, you've got your Texas, Oklahoma State, the traditional powers. How do you see them this? And the Big 12 is now 10 teams.
That's right. And the Big 10 is 12 team. Very confusing in that respect. I'm going to say there's 6 main teams that are going to be in everybody's ranked top 25 at the start of the year. Number 6, I'm going to go with Kansas State in my magazine, number 6. Last year, I loved Kansas State. What a great story they were. Bill Snyder and company pulled 9 upsets during the course of the year. That's a remarkable feat. In fact, Bruce, every Saturday I do ESPN Radio National, and they always ask me for an upset pick. I would just pick Kansas State each week. Looked like a genius by the end of the year. Bill Snyder was my coach of the year in the magazine, and I think they did a phenomenal job. But their quarterback, Colin Klein, overachieved a little bit. He had over 300 carries and was able to play every single game. You can't run Colin Klein 300 times and expect him to stay healthy. So I don't think Kansas State catches the same breaks last year that they did. I don't think they can pull as many upsets, and that's why I picked them 6. Now, 5th, I picked TCU. TCU's a team where you look at their schedule. They may just start off with an 8-0 record as a possibility. They could be favored in their first 8 games. But their final 4 games of the season are very tough, and they play a lot of them on the road against the best teams of the Big 12. So I think TCU is going to have an explosive offense with Casey Pahal, a quarterback, a very deep set of running backs, a veteran offensive line. But, for 3 straight years, TCU is number 1 in the NCAA in total defense. Their defense dropped off some last year, and I don't see them getting it back this year. They lost a couple of key linebackers during the spring that aren't going to be back this season. So I see them as, a potential top 30 defense, but not the best defense out there. So I've got TCU coming in number 5. West Virginia I've got coming in number 4 in the Big 12 this year. Explosive on offense. And Dana Holgorsen said it all year long. He said, this is an offense that's learning my system and getting better by the week. We saw it in the bowl game with 70 points. Geno Smith has got explosive receivers. They lost their running back at the end of the year. He's back and healthy. The offensive line is solid. I think they have a legitimate top 10 offense. Defense, they weren't great last year. They played a 3-3-5 defense, and they're switching this year to more of a 4-3 defense. So there's a little bit of a scheme change. And they're not taking on Big East defenses anymore. They're taking on Big 12 offenses, which are very potent. So I think they're still going to struggle a little bit defensively. I think West Virginia gets TCU at home, gets Kansas State at home. Those are a couple of big games. But they play most of the other big boys on the road. That's why I picked them 4th. Now, for the top 3 teams in the Big 12, what a story Oklahoma State was last year. They almost played in the national title game. They were a team with Brandon Weeden at quarterback, Justin Blackman at wide receiver, and a lot of folks out there called for them to play in the title game, although I did think they were the 3rd best team. Well, they lose Weeden and they lose Blackman, but a couple of years ago, Gundy lost his top quarterback, lost his top running back and receiver, and they still ended up competing for the Big 12 title. They get West Virginia at home this year. They get TCU at home this year. They get Texas at home even. So they've got a chance to finish up higher. I've seen most other magazines are forecasting them 4th or 5th, but I've got them up there tied for 2nd along with Texas. I think they're going to have a surprisingly good year. Now with Texas, I've seen people pick them as low as 6 this year, but they're my number one surprise team in the country. A non-top 10 team that I actually think can contend for the national title. When you look at Texas, they have a defense that last year allowed 300 yards per game on defense against Big 12 offenses. And they've got 6 starters back on the defensive side of the ball. Offensively, they struggled last year. They had David Ash and Case McCoy were a quarterback. They began the year with Garrett Gilbert as a starter at quarterback. Gilbert completed 48%. They benched him. They went to a pair of untested guys in Ash and McCoy. They looked great at times. They looked inexperienced at times, and it showed in the offense. But those guys are back in experience. They've got a tremendous running back core with Malcolm Brown and Bergeron, and they add in my number one rated running back out of high school, and Jonathan Gray. They actually have one of the best running back cores in the country, a solid offensive line. So I think Texas is now a complete team. They've got the offense, they've got the defense. They do have to play Oklahoma State on the road, and late in the year they have to play both West Virginia and TCU on the road. But once again, I think the Big 12 is a step above those two conferences, and I think they're capable of winning both those games. The only game I have an underdog in all year is when they play Oklahoma, and that would be on October the 13th. And in that game, I do have Oklahoma favored, but if Texas pulls the upset there in the Red River rivalry, I would put them as a potential national championship contender. But my pick to win the Big 12 this year, Bruce, is Oklahoma. And, last year, everybody's number one at the start of the season was Oklahoma. I went out of the box, I had Alabama. But this year's Oklahoma may be just like Alabama was last year. And what I'm referring to when I say that is 2 years ago, Alabama was everybody's pick for number one. They lost 3 games, so they sort of fell out of favor. They bounced back and won the national title. Oklahoma last year lost 3 games. They've sort of fallen out of favor with everybody, but their offense looks pretty solid. Landry Jones is one of the best quarterbacks out there. Now, last year he struggled at the end of the year. Didn't have his top running back, Whaley. Didn't have his top wide receiver, Broyles. He only had a 1-6 ratio over the last 4 games. But he's got a good receiving core. He gets his running back back. And Colt McCoy, in his first full year as a starter at Texas, great year. Second year, he was down. I projected a comeback year in his third year, and he did have that. Even had a better year than his first year as a starter. I think the same thing is going to happen with Landry Jones. The offensive line is solid. The defense gave up something like 373 yards per game last year, which was underperforming. I think they've got the talent on that side of the ball to be much stronger. The special teams look good. And then with the schedule, I think they can win their toughest road games this year. Actually, I had misspoke earlier. I said Texas had those 2 tough road games. It's Oklahoma that's got those 2 tough road games at the end. West Virginia and TCU. I think they're capable of winning both of those. They get Oklahoma State at home. They've got Texas in the Red River rivalry.
They got Notre Dame at home, too, in a non-conference game.
And they'll be a pretty good-sized favorite for that one. So the schedule's not easy, but I do think they'll be favored in all 12 games. So I actually have the Sooners running the table this year.
When we return, Phil Steele predicts the Pac-12.